Morning, it's July 3rd, and this is To My Liberal Friends. The Supreme Court has spoken, and most liberals are angry. Of course, when the court is voting their way, they sing its praises. This past week, the Supreme Court handed down several key decisions. The first decision had to deal with affirmative action and using race as a basis for college admission. If you read the plaintiff's case and the decision, you realize the court had come to no other decision to rule that it violated the Equal Protection Clause. The United States Constitution bans discrimination in any shape or form. Clearly, using race as a basis for admission to a university was discriminatory and had an adverse impact on students who applied and failed to gain entry. Well, Joe Biden had to jump in and show his political stripes with this statement, quote, "Today's court decision is a severe disappointment to so many people, including me, but we cannot let the decision be a permanent setback for the country. We need to keep an open door of opportunities. We need to remember that diversity is our strength," end quote. And not to be outdone, Barack Obama said this, quote, "Like any policy, affirmative action wasn't perfect, but allowed generations of students like Michelle and me to prove we belonged. Now it's up to all of us to give young people the opportunities they deserve and to help students everywhere benefit from new perspectives," end quote. None of this addresses the real issue, is that it was discriminatory. Then the court handed down two decisions based primarily on religion, but also on freedom of speech. They ruled that a worker who did not want to work on his Sabbath could not be forced to work that day. The court said that unless an employer could show significant harm to its business by allowing the worker to miss that day, then the worker could not be compelled to work on a day based on freedom of religion. The second case in this area dealt with a web designer who did not want to design websites for same-sex marriage couples. She maintained it violated her First Amendment of free speech, as well as being protected by her Christian faith. Now, I had mixed feelings about this decision. Since I believe that you are open for business to the public, you should be obligated to serve everyone. But after reading the decision, I came to agree with Justice Gorsuch, who wrote, quote, "The First Amendment envisions the United States as a rich and complex place where all persons are free to think and speak as they wish, not as a government demands," end quote. He said Colorado sought to, quote, "deny that promise." And he further wrote, "All manner of speech, from pictures, films, paintings, drawings, and engravings, to oral utterance and the printed word, qualify for the First Amendment's protection. No less can hold true when it comes to speech like Ms. Smith's conveyed over the internet." Now, I agreed with him because he centered on the free speech aspect of the case. The final decision was one that I knew was coming. I was pretty sure I knew how and where the court would rule. They made it clear that President Biden did not have the statutory authority to cancel student debt, no matter how much he wanted to take that action. The administration had based its move on the HEROES Act, and the court said in their decision, quote, "The HEROES Act allows the Secretary of Education to waive or modify existing statutory or regulatory provisions applicable to financial assistance programs under the Education Act, but does not allow the Secretary to rewrite that statute to the extent of canceling $430 billion of student loan principal," end quote. Chief Justice Roberts also quoted former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi by stating, and this is exact quote from her, quote, "As then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi explained, people think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not," end quote. And Roberts quoted that from a July 28, 2021 press conference. She said at that time again, "He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have the power. That has to be an act of Congress," end quote. And she is absolutely correct. The key decisions were 6-3, with the three dissenters being Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, all in the minority. They wrote and said scathing comments about the decisions that prompted Chief Justice Roberts to chastise them for being so critical just because a decision did not go their way. President Biden had already called the Supreme Court not a normal court. These types of comments further the belief that it's undermining our judicial system in this country, and the whining by those on the left wears a little old when they begin it every time they don't get a decision they wanted. They had nothing to say but praise when the court ruled against the state of North Carolina on drawing legislative district. That was okay. And you have to love Justice Kagan's comment on the dissent on the student loan decision. Quote, "The majority stance, as I explained last term, prevents Congress from doing its policymaking job in the way it thinks best," end quote. Think about that. She is then corrected by Chief Justice Roberts with the following comment, quote, The dissent is correct that this is a case about one branch of government arrogating to itself power belonging to another, but it is the executive seizing the power of the legislature, end quote. What Justice Kagan is saying is that liberals know better than anyone else, and the majority on the court are the ones that are not informed. She's also suggesting that those that oppose her viewpoint in Congress are also wrong, and that seems to be the mindset of all liberals these days. If you can't get what you want, they call you names and denigrate you for not adhering to their enlightened philosophy of life. But what was clear in this case, in particular, it highlighted the clear separation of powers that the Founding Fathers established in the Constitution. Clearly, abolishing the debt was basically a tax imposition on the general public to cover those costs. That power lies solely with the legislature, not the executive or judicial branches. But Joe Biden desperately needs to buy the votes of those wanting their debt abolished or reduced as he heads into 2024. He has made it clear that he will make another try to find another method to accomplish his goal. Just this January, he hinted at what he might do if he lost a court case. I think he knew he was going to lose. He proposed to sweeten the Obama income-based repayment plans by capping monthly payments at 5% of discretionary income and discharging unpaid debt after 20 years. Well, who's going to decide what's discretionary and what's not? He also would say borrowers who make less than $32,800 wouldn't have to pay a penny, while the average borrower would save more than $1,000 a year or $20,000 over 20 years. The Penn Wharton budget model estimates this expansion could cost as much as $471 billion, which is on top of the $500 billion or so that's already set to be forgiven. Congress didn't authorize the president to cancel student loans on the installment plan either. There's a seldom education in the second kick of a mule, as Mitch McConnell likes to say, but the courts will have every reason to try over Mr. Biden's next illegal loan cancellation. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button.